Welcome to Getting Personal, a monthly podcast diving deep into the stories of the heartbeat of HR. Brought to you by Compt, a global lifestyle benefits platform where companies empower employees with benefits and rewards they'll use and appreciate, whoever and wherever they are in life.
Today, I am joined by Marnie Robbins, a seasoned culture strategist, coach, speaker with over a decade of experience in people operations. She's also the founder of Vibe People Studio, where she specializes in transforming workplace cultures by turning cultural insights into actionable people first strategies for organizations of all sizes. And as if that wasn't enough, she has a dang good podcast that you should listen to.
With some great guests.
I know I was gonna say, specifically maybe with the episode I'm on or others because you'll learn something.
Right, but start with Lauren.
Yes.
You'll be hooked.
Marnie, thank you for joining me, for making time since you got a lot going on.
I do. Lots of good things going on, but thanks for having me. I've been excited. I got to have the opportunity to get to know you on the other side of the microphone, so to speak, and was just so tickled that I was able to come on the Comp podcast as well.
I love that. Let's dive right in because how do we summarize a career's worth of people leadership roles at all of the different companies you've been at? They're different sizes, stages, they're scaling at different rates. But I think one thing that can bring us back to maybe a point that's relatable for everyone, especially right now, as someone in HR or just people leadership. Um, Tell me about a time when you felt maybe out of your depth as a leader. I know it's like a really hard hitting off the top question, but let's
Get
just
right
get
in there.
right to it because it's it's happening to a lot of people right now across organizations.
Yeah, and because of external factors, right? It's just no one, I think, really has all the right answers, nor do they. But I mean, honestly, I've had a very long, winding path with lots of fun adventures, and I felt out of depth in every single role that I've taken, or
Interesting.
every single client. At some point, I have felt out of my depth. Um, but when I think of that question though, of like, when did you really feel super uncomfortable? I reflect back on one company. I've had a lot of time in startups, so it's I kind of know the rule book for joining a fast growing startup that's scrappy and just building the plane while flying. But in this particular company, I had one of my former bosses, a CEO at another company, took on a new role with a 25-year-old tech company that was going through a moment of transformation. So they were going from a more enterprise type business to more SaaS like in nature. And with that came a new way of doing business, new product line, new branding. And he's like, first person I need on board is a people and culture professional, someone who's
Mm,
going to take this team that's been with us for either long tenures, short tenures, anywhere in between, and help us build this company and go through this change management process. Was really excited about it, knew I could work with this person very easily, had trust established. And so we get in there and we do our strategy sessions. We come up with new core values, and then we're talking about our wildly audacious goals for the year and have our three main goals and what we're going to do. And that was in March of 2020. And
oh,
yeah, right.
naturally.
Everyone has that, right? So it in all of a sudden, so we developed this big new strategy, and within a month, we're like, oh, we're sending everyone home. And this was an on-prem company. They weren't used to working remote or distributed. And oh, by the way that we were going to do business now shifted, and we got to revert back and go to plan B. And so that leader who brought me on exited the company. And here I was like, oh, shoot. Okay, what do we do now? And
Right.
so this team that we had brought in from a grassroots perspective to say, okay, what are our big goals and our core values? They actually came to me and said, hey, Marnie, we were really excited about some of the things that we were planning. We understand that we can't go in the direction that we were previously going, but we know that something needs to change. They were hungry for change, which was actually super exciting from my point. It's like, wow, okay, cool. Well, let's work through this. So all of a sudden, we found ourselves without the co-founders, like in a room kind of doing this more grassroots of saying, okay, what does V2 look like for the company? And so I found myself really kind of facilitating that conversation is, okay, well, then where are we today? And how do we want to change? And then we get to the end of those, at that time, virtual sessions. And they said, "Oh, by the way, we have, the new strategy doc put together. Can you go ahead and present it to the co-founders and the CFO? Because we just feel like you're the spokesperson at this point." And I don't know about you, but I've been an HR people ops pro. I'm not usually the one presenting the overall strategy of the business. So totally uncomfortable, felt out of my depth, but I did it. It went well. But I think really what that proved to me, that whole situation was like in this role, we take a lot of the brunt of that change, and we take a lot of getting people through in a very constant and comfortable and welcoming environment. But that also means we have to rely on our subject matter experts to tell us what that future is. And so really I might have been presenting the strategy. It wasn't my strategy, it was their strategy. But they just used me as kind of that glue and that person who, yeah, just helped empower them to come up with that strategy. So I think for me, it was a very uncomfortable 6 months, and we lived through it, but it really was cool to see in due to external factors that we were able to come back together and do something really cool and move the company forward despite it.
And, I think since then we've seen the continuation of that. Like HR was put in this driver's seat and in this position where you're like, okay, well, now you get to present and speak business strategy and tie everything back to outcomes and ROI and measure this and that. And I've seen it like ebb and flow since COVID happened, with this push and pull of like, all right, who is in charge of what is happening right now when it comes to culture change? And there's this like involvement from the C suite and maybe directives from the finance team, but then HR owns a lot of that function. But then we're like, okay, well, don't we all technically own culture change?
Yes.
Um, so it gets very sticky. But I think what's interesting is that, well, first of all, we're talking about it and trying to like figure out how do we facilitate this? Where do we go from here? Who owns this? Um, but we're also making progress with those things because you recently ran a mastermind session on this.
Exactly. Yes.
So even though you said you were out of your depth, you must have figured something out because I think you have answers or key lessons that we need to hear.
Yes, or unpack. I think I figured out what not to do, and then
Well,
and
that's a
then
good start.
yeah, hey, that it's an iterative process, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so me and my good friend and partner Mindy Honkoop, who is amazing. She has her own agile and HR business. We partnered up just through a common language that we developed separately. And all of a sudden, she and I were kind of saying the same things. We were talking about, it's not just one thing, it's a lot of things. And so, how do we really, work in a human centric fashion? And we talked a lot about people ecosystems. That's really what people operations is developing an ecosystem where that culture thrives. Culture is almost an output or an aura or set of behaviors in an organization. So we came up with Catalytic Cultures Mastermind, where Mindy is an expert facilitator on human centered design. And really, what we did was kind of built on the principles of human centered design is this mastermind program that's 3 months. We're in our last month of our pilot program. And, it's not changing the world. It's literally not it's sweating the small stuff to make the big stuff bigger. And so what we're doing in that 3-month journey is saying, okay, we're going to pick the one thing, the one observable thing, and we're going to work on that one. What's your hypothesis? If my hypothesis is if we change this one thing, then we might get a little more performance out of this one area of the business or something very small and simple. Because the first thing that we discovered in the mastermind was really along the lines of the deer in headlights. Look, you have all of our participants look like, I'm really excited to be here. But number one, I don't have the influence over the organization or the buy in to do anything big. Like, I think they thought, I've got to do something grand or big as it pertains to culture and design. And
Yeah.
we had to change the mindset of that's not what we're doing here. We are literally not pruning a forest, we are pruning a tree, and with that tree it will develop over time. And so had to get down to first principles thinking of, okay, just what's the one thing within your scope of influence that you feel is going to be that catalyst for that culture shift, and then you repeat it, right? So now here we are in month 3, and it's fun because you see some of these little ideas that they had, and they're implementing those ideas, and they're saying, okay, this is what I'm learning, maybe I need to adjust it a little bit, or maybe like, yes, it's working. Like I see the metric I was going for, I see that changing, or they have to continue it on. So I think that's the biggest lesson that we've learned thus far is, it's easy to get overwhelmed based on influence and, being in the whirlwind of the day-to-day stuff. So just pick the one thing and then repeat.
So give me an example of what you're seeing play out within this mastermind. Like one of the details that someone got into, the nitty-gritty of it, and how they've developed that over time. And obviously they're still workshopping it and figuring things out, and the light bulb moments keep happening. But what's something that when I ask you, tell me more about the mastermind, is like the one thing that is coming up immediately in your brain, like, ooh, this is a really good example.
Yeah, yeah, and I hope I don't betray her trust there, but we have one participant who, I mean, opportunistic timing. There was one department in her organization that was really in turmoil, and where so the first part of the mastermind, we get really big into diagnosis and discovery. Like, you don't have to know exactly what you're going to work on, so let's get really curious. And so what she acknowledged was there was one department in the organization, and frankly, she hadn't worked with that department very closely
Mm,
before. She was always with the tech side, and hadn't really gone over to the services side. And they had a lot of leadership changes. They had a lot of changing of targets for, their service delivery targets. And they happen to have a new leader coming on board. And so the after kind of going through this discovery, she spoke to the new leader and said, "How can I help you make this department better? How can I help enable you to make your team more productive, happy, healthy, and moving forward? Because right now they're not hitting their targets. They're not actually performing well." And so they came up with a game plan of, yes, these are the three big things that I think we need to work on. So she utilized her stakeholders, and then she came up with a hypothesis, and the hypothesis was really along the lines that if we define our service delivery funnel on the front end and we reevaluate our performance metrics, then the team is going to be more aligned, be more clear, and understand what they're doing. So
mm.
fast forward to today when she's reflecting, and I have another session with her this week, so I'm like, I can't wait to learn more. But where she's really getting aligned with the team is they are. The feedback is, I know what I'm doing. I know the targets, and I'm bought in, by the way. And oh, she's now a partner with this new leader. So this person who's an HR professional who's maybe had a hard time, talking to the leadership team and really getting that trust, she's getting that trust because she's
Mm.
helped that one leader. And that I'm so excited about, because I bet you when I check in with her 6 months from now, she will have helped another leader in a very similar situation. So that's where it's that catalytic piece of, it's just building that trust, building that rapport, and doing the things that propel the company forward. And it's kind of that flywheel effect.
That's the perfect transition into what I was going to ask you next, which was about the reality that it's not always a smooth ride to change culture.
No.
Has anyone ever walked into, their workplace and said, "I'm gonna just overhaul all of this," and it goes so swimmingly well, and they never face any opposition? I doubt it.
Yeah.
Um, Tell me about a time maybe you faced some significant resistance, something that I don't know, maybe it helped teach you, the tools or the language, the conversations that you need to have so that you could pass them on to the people in this mastermind and say, "Hey, if you're coming up against these things, this is what I would recommend."
Yeah, yeah, that stakeholder management piece is huge, and I think we spent a lot of time on that piece in the
Yeah.
mastermind. We talked about that a lot, is that stakeholder management, buy-in, sales, you name it. So when I when I think I actually early in my career, I think I naively would be like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna do all the cool things, and it's gonna be a culture shift." I mean, that was so naive. But yeah, today it's like I realize it's leadership who actually changes, and so uh, it I actually referenced the same company I was kinda talking about, before because that was probably the most, dug in from a cultural perspective. They had time and seats. It's not easy with startups, I shouldn't say that. But with startups, you're very founder centric.
Mhm.
That's a lot of the culture, and you kinda take that and play with it, and it's like, what part of the founder vision, mission, all of that we want to take and harness as we scale. But when you have a company that's kind of dug into historical ways of doing business and whatnot, that can be really difficult. So, earlier I was talking about how we were doing operational strategy and we were talking about all that. But to be honest, I was hired to come in and actually update the way their people operations ecosystem. So I was supposed to be updating the way they performance management, killing the traditional performance management review into a more continuous feedback loop, or moving the employee handbook to be less like legalese and being a little more fresh and new. But then also the way that leaders spoke to their employees, more coach
Right.
like in nature. So all of that had to happen too throughout all of this. And again, lots of people in different tenures in different areas of the business, and change is super uncomfortable. People, even though they even may be hungry for change, it gets them a little squirmy, right?
Yep.
So that's where there was two big things that I leaned into, and that was transparency of communication. Always understanding, we are getting this experience right together. This is not something you that we're doing in a silo and rolling out and it's top down. We're actually doing this together, and we're experimenting and iterating and moving forward. But then I brought stakeholders into the mix. So this was not only the leadership team, but I brought people who had influence throughout the organization, people who had been with the company for a long time, people who just came in with fresh eyes. And so we formed a smaller spin out of the group, which was called the Curious Team, because we wanted to be really curious in nature. And we met once a month. I said, let's just challenge some of the assumptions here. Let's talk about some of the changes that we're making from a people operations perspective. For instance, you know, PTO. Let's start discussing what unlimited PTO looks like for us. Maybe it's not for us, but let's talk about how that would work and how we would operate. What does healthy work-life balance look like for us? How do we set boundaries for each other? And oh, by the way, let's talk as a group of how are we going to talk to the big dogs up in the C-suite to make sure that they respect our boundaries. If we say yes, work-life balance is really important for us, and so that created kind of this united, front. It created buy-in, and then you also have ambassadors to rolling out that type of, cultural shift. So that to me was the biggest thing, was stakeholder management, bringing them in to help co-create or at least be able to challenge and poke holes, and then move forward and continue to foster the changes, continuing to get the feedback and making those processes better.
Did you ever find it difficult to, um, get people on your side or get people on your team when there's that, there I don't know, like, this underlying issue between everyone else and HR. We're like, HR is
Yeah.
seen as the bad guy, and we're all like, oh, they want to do change. They want to try this stuff. I don't know. Like, there's always some level of suspicion or lack of trust or whatever. And I imagine that's hard to overcome as well. Because even in a startup environment where everyone's like excited to experiment, you bring your baggage from somewhere else, and you're like, well, in my last job, HR did me dirty, or my manager and HR, they teamed up and I got left out to dry, or whatever that looks like.
Yep.
If you have a good relationship with that department or that person in your new role, it's like that, I don't know, this subconscious level of change is scary, and now it's coming from a person that I'm like about.
Yeah, yeah, there is a lot of post-traumatic HR stress from people. And and sometimes I kinda, like, I don't know why I, like, put my shoulder in, I'm like, "Okay, we're gonna fix this," and try to, like, I'm a cool mom, you can
Yes.
try to try to adjust their thinking, but it does take time. I think, yeah, to me, the biggest thing is proof is in the pudding. You know, um, a lot of times with human resources, and we're really stuck in that really precarious situation, depending on the company, of towing the line for the company and doing what's right for the company, which sometimes can break trust. And it's not the HR person's fault; it's it's the role, right? And I do see that role changing, which is very, it warms my heart a little bit to kind of see as the role changes from, you know policy police to, more human centric design. I think that's what I look for in both companies and clients, for that perspective, from that perspective. But it takes time. And so one of the first things I do when coming into an organization is like, okay, what are some of the low-hanging fruit that I could do to let them understand? It's like, no, I'll stand behind what we're trying to do, and just doing a lot of listening. But I have the hardest time with, and it's stereotypical, it's not so much anymore, but like software engineers. The lack of trust. And I had one company that the best thing I could have done was go sit in there. My desk was with the software engineering team, and they were, I think, mortified to begin with. Like, it got really quiet for a
They're like,
while.
she's watching us.
I know. Yes, exactly. But then when they started to figure out, like, I actually am just here to learn, and what I took away from it was, um, agile operations. I learned from them of how they operated, how they always said, that's interesting," whenever a problem was presented. It was never like, "That's a problem, hellfire and brimstone." It was really just, "Ooh, that's interesting. Let's help figure that out." And that helps me shape, or try to shape, cultures moving forward, of how do you create that type of environment where everyone feels that they can problem solve. So long story short is to say, yes, absolutely, I come across it a lot, takes a long time. But and to this day, I'm sure there's some people who are like, no, she's full of it, like, I'm not buying it, lady. And that's okay. But for the most part, I think it's just over time trust.
Speaking of trust and change, because in the last, geez, 5 something ish years, as if the way we work hasn't blown up enough, uh, because why would anything ever just be the same for more than 1 quarter at a time? Um, let's talk a little bit about AI. I know that there's a lot of chatter in the HR communities I'm on the edge of, the Slack groups, LinkedIn, around first. Well, how do we even build a policy around this? And is that where we begin, or do we try to calm people's fears of AI is going to take my job, or maybe we need to rewrite the narrative and it's use AI to upskill the workforce, but now we're dealing with it within our own HR tools. So
Yep.
we have to learn it and then pass it on to everyone else. And there's the way I'm describing it right now sounds like chaos because it is. So
Right. Yep. Terrifying.
Yeah, so speaking of change,
Mhm.
I'd love your view on what HR's role is in all of this, if you're even seeing some early examples of how we can be successful in this, if it's a conversation that's come up in the mastermind. Give me everything you're thinking.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Oh gosh, that would take a really long time. But I remember when we really, I don't know, gosh, just a year and a half ago, I was doing webinars where we were talking about AI specific to people operations, and at that time, I was really kind of a curiosity of what are some of the things that you could do with Chat GPT or other LLMs that like job descriptions, like really quick. We started to figure out like, oh, we can really get out of the day to day doldrums with a lot of the things that we do. Compensation. You can actually put in your employer brand parameters into your model, and it will start pumping out content that sounds like your brand voice, and
Mhm.
and that really does free us up to be more personal in the way that that sounds counterintuitive, but more personal in the way that we communicate, because we can do it in more mediums and we can be faster and we can tailor, if I'm talking to a particular department or demographic, that I can tailor that message. But as far as the role, that's been really interesting because I think, AI in general is moving too fast for us to be like, oh, well, we need to just train all of our employees on, AI. No, it's all on its own, but how do we take AI and put it into our operational practices in a way that we understand the parameters or the safety nets within the organization, and also how do we encourage the team members who may be a little concerned about using it, maybe a little scared, or how do we navigate when we do get that request to say, well, we know that that position can actually be automated through AI. And I think that's where a lot of HR and people ops professionals currently are is, okay, well, number one, how do we experiment with AI in a safe way? Are you a healthcare company? Is HIPAA an issue? Okay, well, then we have to make sure that the AI that we bring in is either insured, it's proprietary, it's through, yeah, like, what are they doing with the data? Do you own the data? That's with partnership with IT. If you have IT, a lot of companies I work with don't have IT, so you have to work with whoever whoever that person is. But there's the other aspect of, you know, what like, we can't have a million AI tools in our organization, so what is our AI tech stack? A lot of times, AI is just coming through the tech stack that we already have, like
Yeah.
HRIS systems. All of a sudden, they have an AI bot. Okay, well, then that's great. So, what do we actually need to purchase versus what's there? And I think getting really clean and clear about what that tech stack is, and then reevaluating because it's just evolving so fast. You just can't say, okay, that's our tech stack. And then 5 years later, it's going to be the same. It doesn't work that way. So there's that piece. But then also, for instance, I have a client that we have a Slack channel where it's like, these are the things that we're doing with AI that we're experimenting with. And then it will actually go into, okay, here's an experiment that we're doing with AI, and this is how we're going to operationalize it into the organization. So it's out there, it's in the open, and it's more of a safe space for people to test it out and also get consensus on which tools they're using. So it's all the things. But I mean, from a people ops perspective, yeah. I mean, we all talk about how we want to get away from the day to day and the whirlwind and all of that. And frankly, that helps. That it really does free up a lot of that, policies, writing, things like that just took forever. So of course you do have to vet it, but yeah.
I know so many CEOs are obsessed with the idea of AI and being on the forefront of it. I saw some statistic this morning and I wish I could remember what it was, but it was an alarmingly large number of CEOs who were like, this is it, this is what we're doing. And then after that, there's really no directive on who is responsible for this within an organization. And I know a lot of times it's like the I don't know, the go-to move for HR to own everything,
Right.
whatever that's about. It just falls under your plate, and I don't know if maybe that's because they think this is a new tool or new things that our people will need to learn, and that is learning and development. And then in some organizations, that falls under this HR umbrella. So then it just we all start to follow the same kind of patterns.
Yeah.
Um, but what is HR's role in all of this? Does this belong to HR? Does this belong to everybody in the organization? Like, who is responsible? I need answers.
I don't know. No, I think it's a role that hasn't been developed yet. Yeah,
Mm,
and I think that the reason it goes to human resources is, most of the time we have under our realm the code of conduct, and that typically involves technology and how we interface and interact with technology. And that, the same is true for AI is, they naturally gravitate to human resources because we are the ones who say, okay, this is the way that we should conduct ourselves around this new technology, and also training and development. This is how you utilize it. And so I can see where, depending on how sophisticated your HR team is, but if you do have a learning and development wing, maybe you do have someone who is quite literally that technologist that is also a trainer, that is also well versed in people operations. They don't necessarily need to be, yeah, an engineer or an IT professional, but someone who at least knows the inner workings, also knows the parameters that they can actually train and keep people updated with that. But I don't know. That's kind of where I see it, is like, because that role in my mind is not yet existent in most organizations, that HR is going to be the default for now.
yeah, that gets to the point I was going to make about default leading to burnout
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it's always something new on the plate, whether that's you're in charge of this entire tech stack and now you need to consolidate it, or we talked earlier about now you have to speak the business language, the language of finance. You have to understand maybe just a smidge of accounting so that you can make sure your payroll software is operating effectively or whatever that looks like.
Yep.
HR people are burnout. I think that's a fair sweeping statement to
Yes.
make.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, what do you do when you are feeling burnout or overwhelmed? Especially since you're working with so many different companies and you're also maybe getting a glimpse of what's happening within those companies, but then also from the people who are involved in the mastermind.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Like, there's, with the different projects, I think even it's of my own doing, lots of irons in the fire, and it's hard to say no to anything when you want to grow your company. And when you
Yeah.
want to do all of these things and you want to, Mindy always says, like, my purpose is helping HR professionals. And I'm like, yeah, me too, and so that's go save the HR professionals who want camaraderie, etc. Long story short, so burnout's real. I think that's why you've seen a kind of an increase in fractional, and then those fractional people being like, "Oh, wait, no, this is like even more work, so I'm going to go back full time."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. I've definitely seen the fractional people that I'm connected to on LinkedIn. They start one venture and then they get involved in so many different things because they're so passionate about it. And then I scroll through like the career experience section of LinkedIn and they have like 7 jobs happening all at once. And I'm like, what are you doing?
right, right. And like, are they all active, or
Right.
what's like? Oh, golly. So for me, what I've done in recently, I mean, honestly, I liken it to like limp mode. When your car kind of breaks and it goes into limp mode, it's just enough to get you to the next service station or whatnot. Um, when I get burnout, I go into limp mode. But when I recognize that, I start to say, okay, what are my success parameters for the upcoming day? So my level of success decreases dramatically when I'm in limp mode, and I have to be okay with that. So I'm asking myself the question, what are the three top things that I just got to get done today? And if I get those three top things done, then I killed it today because my head's not there, my mind's not there. Uh, but you can go into, okay, well, then, I need to take time off. But even taking time off, or go for a walk. And of course, you want to model those things. If I go for a walk, if I have to step away, I'm putting that in my Slack notification as a leader to make sure that others know I'm setting those boundaries. I'm setting this news. It's like, okay, I'm here today. That being said, that doesn't fix it, right? A lot of times you can take a vacation, you can come back more stressed because guess what? The work's still there. And
Yeah.
so for me, what I've discovered is I have to really search and be intentional about finding that I wouldn't even say purpose, but that one thing that brings me back into my zone of genius. So if I'm in limp mode, if I'm really not thinking creatively, I have to kind of find where I'm getting those creative thoughts on their own. And then I have to follow it. So I think that's the thing is picking up that crumb of your zone of genius and following it. Something light, nothing too cumbersome, but outside of that day-to-day, like, grind that you go through, and that helps spark that interest, back in your role, and yeah, that's probably terrible advice, but if you can't find it in your role, then maybe it's time to go find what that purpose and what that role is, or if, like, is it a conversation that you have with your leader? To be like, "Look, I am just struggling, here." So, and hopefully you work for an organization that allows you to have those conversations. If you don't, or if you're a leader who doesn't feel like you're having conversations, give me a call. We'll figure that out. But yeah. So that for me is like, yeah, go into limp mode. Take time if I have to, but you gotta find that glimmer of zone of genius.
Especially because we're balancing so many things and responsibilities. We're learning new tools. We just talked about AI and how you know what? I'm going to add this extra little thing that I've been thinking about. I keep seeing uh, requests, from journalists looking for AI experts. And I'm like, What? Are there experts out there?
What
Aren't
is
we
that?
all still learning right now? And maybe even learning forever. And as we're learning and balancing or not balancing all of our responsibilities and burnout, like, we're gonna make mistakes and mistakes are gonna happen. So before we go, I'd love for you to tell me about a mistake you've made.
What a great way to wrap up, Lauren.
Well, Marnie, tell me how you blew it recently and what it taught you about leadership or how to move forward. And honestly, I think maybe this becomes a conversation about as we wrap it into burnout and things, just like tackling those three small things, giving yourself grace, understanding that like we're hurtling through the year and time and space. And
Yeah.
it just is what it is.
Yep. One of my favorite quotes that I heard about change is sometimes you just gotta let go and swim. And that I think is pretty profound. You don't even have to explain what they were talking about. It's like, oh, I get it. Let go and swim. And that's um probably been my mantra for a few years now. But yeah, a recent mistake is probably along those lines, getting in the whirlwind of the day to day and having, a lot of clients and whatnot. But I had helped a company transition from one PEO to another. And in the onboarding, I probably didn't pay as much of attention as I ought to have with how they tackled employee, separations or terminating, like when they exit a company. And so I did everything like the way that I just would normally do because I'm like, I know technology, it's fine. Well, everything's great. And we paid them twice for their last paycheck. And if anyone in the people in HR space, no, it's really hard to get that money back. Like
Yeah.
you can't like just say, oops, like, I'm just going to pull it back out of your bank account. So, what I think my learning lesson, so I reached out to the person. Luckily, he was so gracious and worked. It was actually kind of a cumbersome process to get that money back. There was ACHs and numbers and permissions and all of that involved. And, really, I think the big things that I learned was, number one, pay attention. Just because you've been around the block, like, listen, and learn. Don't make assumptions that you know how to do things. Still a lesson that I learn all the time, even though I've been around forever. And then number two is to, hire people with integrity that and treat them well. Then treat
Yeah.
them well to the point that when they leave, they have no problem saying, "Oh, yeah, I get that." And then 3 is just own up. Yeah, I remember, approaching him like, "Well, I messed up. Can you help me out here?" And being able to say sorry. I remember early in my career, I had a boss that said, "Don't say you're sorry." I get why he said that, like, because I was trying to, I was early in my career. I probably said sorry too much. But today, I'm like, no, I say sorry all the time because I am sorry a lot. And I think being able to own up to, like, oh, I goofed, but this is how, I think we can fix it, really lends itself to growth and co-creation.
It also makes for a better culture for you and for everyone.
Right. Yeah. That's like, I can't believe the tech company did that. It's like, no, it's me. I'm the problem.
Well, I would say that you're a good problem to have because I appreciated speaking with you for this podcast and all of the other times that we've chatted on yours and in emails and across the internet. Thank you for your time, Marnie.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thanks for joining us on Getting Personal, brought to you by lifestyle benefits experts at Compt. Remember, you can always find more stories and helpful insights on our LinkedIn and blog.